Dr. Michael Zimmerman, welcome to Veridical.
Thank you. Just call me Dr. Z.
Yes, sir, Dr. Z. So tell us real quick how you got into academia and what specifically took your, what made you study the topic we're going to be talking about today? What brought you to
Well, the
that?
whole the UFO scene now currently new terminology UAP. It's all the same stuff. I mean, I've been interested in it since I was a kid. You know, UFO movies are coming out in the 50s and 60s and sci-fi. Everything that we have today was already starting. And we had people in our neighborhood when I was growing up in Ohio had seen UFOs close up going overhead one night. This lit up craft. They ran screaming to my parents' house. I was out somewhere, and so on. So there was some background, and I think at least one of my siblings was abducted, and probably more of us than I may have been because it happens in families. But so I've written some stuff about that. But what got me into philosophy was I had this constant question, what is it all about? What does it all mean that we're here and so on? I mean, I was raised a Catholic, and I'm still a Catholic, my version of it, I suppose. But there are other questions that aren't not answered by Scripture, like
Mhm.
the New Testament has nothing to say about quarks, relativity theory, black holes, and so on, life on other planets. And if there is life on other planets. So I had this, especially in the 80s, I started reading a lot of books about UFOs and alien abduction, especially, and this caught my eye. And then I was at the same time in the early 80s, was very involved in the anti-war movement against nuclear war. This is a terrifying moment in human history. I mean, we came really close. In 82, 83, there was a lot of tension around the divided German border about, whether the U.S. was going to bring in the medium range nuclear missiles and so on. I mean, it was so tense. We all thought we were toast. This is when E.T. showed up. The film had an incredible impact in ways that are hard to decipher. But a year later, in 1983, ABC put out its own made-for-TV movie called The Day After Tomorrow, a
Mhm.
story of what happened to a small Midwestern college town when the ICBM base nearby was nuked by the Soviets. And this is a one-shot viewing back in the day. 100 million people are estimated to have watched it, which is an enormous percentage of the population at that time. And so I got interested in this, and eventually, through various channels, I met with John Mack. He was also a big anti-war activist. John Mack was a Harvard professor who wrote 2 books about alien abduction and became notorious on his own campus. They tried to fire him for his activity here. That didn't turn out. He was okay. But he and I met in Cambridge in 1992, and that started a 12-year relationship. He was a great guy. We had many conversations based upon his work and that of others. I wrote 2 academic articles, peer-reviewed things. Which as far as I know, I don't know if anyone even read these. One was in a
Mm.
major journal in my field, but the stigma about the whole thing was such that no one ever mentioned it. I
Yeah,
never
I
heard it
understand.
from anybody. I thought maybe I'd be condemned or ridiculed. Or
Mhm.
I just got the silent treatment.
Yeah.
This is, by the way, something I would say to my philosophy colleagues. I'm retired, but if you're interested in this topic, be brave and write about it.
Mhm.
Do your research. There are many ways philosophers can intervene in conversation about this topic. Maybe we can talk about some of that.
Yeah. So you were at Boulder, Colorado, right?
Well, I taught first for 30 years at Tulane in New
Okay.
Orleans, and then an additional 10 at Colorado. We
Okay.
moved out here after Hurricane Katrina back in
So
2005.
they didn't think you were a crank. They thought, you
No,
know,
no. Well, here's the thing.
it's a good
Philosophers are
school.
always considered a bit cranky. I mean,
Yeah.
they're out on the edge. The only thing that shuts up conversation faster than to hear that you're that you're a philosophy professor is that if you tell someone you're a mathematician,
Hmm.
'cause that's totally,
Yeah.
over the head of most
Yeah.
philosophers for that matter.
So
Um,
a lot of people will know me for being pretty allergic to conspiracy theories and to always try to avoid them. And I remember last year or 2 years ago, the government released a lot of the UFO footage, or I guess I should say the files taken from military aircraft, where you'd see an object zip across the screen. And my saying throughout life has, or one of my sayings has kind of been, accept what's probable, not what's possible, because I think almost anything is possible, but not everything is probable. So when I
Mhm.
saw the footage of the fighter jets and then there's some object zipping across the screen, it's probable or it's possible that it could be uh, a UAP or a UFO, but it's also more probable that it's maybe some other country's technology, or it's untested technology, or it's a atmospheric anomaly. And when I hear stories about alien abduction now, I was unfamiliar that you had your own, and I want you to talk about that.
Well,
But
I don't know if I was, but my brother
oh,
was. So
okay. When I hear these things, sometimes I say it's possible that they were abducted, or it's probably more probable that there was some um, some sort of uh, unpredictable brain experience for some people out in the
yeah,
Midwest, and I
that,
might say they
that's
did too much psilocybin. But
that's what I used to think. But
yeah,
you got
what
to
changed
study
your
this
mind?
stuff. In other words, if you have to study it, here's the thing: this stuff goes back into the 40s. The same performance of craft that we report today, structured crafts making right angle turns at high speed and so on,
Hmm.
were going on in 1946 and 7. There was no place on Earth that had that technology
Hmm.
that's human.
Hmm.
There's so much of this kind of thing reported. Now, I totally I'm on board with the concern about conspiracy theory. I think we should be heads up about that because
Hmm.
there's so much conspiracy theory nonsense out there now, and
Yeah,
some of it may even be true. But
maybe.
how do you sift through all this stuff?
Hmm.
So I got that. But now we've got 80 years of reports of all kinds. I've met with people who've reported this alien abduction thing. They don't want this to have happened to them in their lives. It's a very strange experience. The people I know who've testified to this, they say there is a physical dimension to it. It's like they were awake, not a dream state, and so on. So, but it is not the place here to adjudicate the empirical claims about these matters.
Hmm.
But so is it hundreds of thousands, if not more, people have experienced these phenomena, things in the sky which are inexplicable, including structured craft, and not just lights in the sky, but structured craft. And so here's my position on the matter. We're being interacted with by some kind of otherness, and we don't know how to define it. One reason that especially the Air Force, the Navy's been much more cooperative if you've followed this at all. The Air Force, there's a coterie of in the Air Force which regards these phenomena as somehow demonic.
Hmm.
I've read about this, and this seems to be, and this is why they rarely show up for these congressional hearings.
Hmm.
They don't want to talk about it. Now, you can say another reason they don't want to talk about it is the invasion of U.S. airspace for 80 years by craft that they can't control. And if you read the early documentation, the real generals and so on were really worried about it and were reporting these things going super fast and all this in the 40s and 50s. So they knew
Hmm.
stuff was going on. But this is an extreme embarrassment to the arm of the Defense Department, which is supposed to control UF
Hmm.
airspace.
Do you find some of the hesitation might be due to a lack of understanding or an inability to understand?
Absolutely.
It's such an overwhelming idea, and when you mentioned demonic, I can imagine many people be saying, "I don't understand it." Demonic.
Well, that's a go-to position often for people because especially when they get into these abductions and so on, it's really strange stuff. Now, here's something
Hmm.
I would add to this. I mean, I come out of a Christian tradition. I don't think this is demonic. In fact, to use that terminology makes it some kind of quasi eternal divine stuff. The
Hmm.
angels spun off from God, from the
Hmm.
and all this kind of stuff. But then the possibility of our relating to them and having some kind of position
Is
with regard
gone.
to them is undercut, then we're just
Yeah.
at their mercy. So I think that's not the right way to go. I think the Catholic Church is pretty good on this. They're open to this possibility
Hmm.
that there may be life elsewhere.
Hmm.
So they don't it's not they don't go immediately say, oh, they're demons and so on. So I think that's a theologically, metaphysically smart position to take. Now let me add one other thing about this, really important. I think it's unlikely that they're from other planets
Oh,
because the problems of interstellar travel. So even for them to have ever found us,
so the
uh,
Fermi paradox is irrelevant here. You think they're
it's
Earth
quite. I mean,
Earth?
it's so. Then what? Let's say we set that aside. Now, the most famous ufologist, Jacques Vallée, you've probably heard of him. He's a French astrophysicist, computer genius, and so on.
Hmm.
He started up all this stuff in the 70s, tracking and cataloging UFO sightings, and he's been enormously influential, written many important books. But he comes down on the side, it's probably not ETs. They're probably
Hmm.
not from other planets, okay?
Hmm.
But then what are our options? What are we left with? Are these beings somehow from under the sea? Do they inhabit a space that around the planet that we can't discern? You know, right now, I think about Plato's cave. Are you
Hmm.
familiar with that?
Yes.
I think it's useful to call on that now. For the most part, we inhabit, according to Plato, we're basically living in a theater. It's a movie, what we call today a movie theater, because what he says is that people are chained to their theater seats and looking straight ahead at the screen,
Hmm.
and from behind, there people. There's these big lights, torches, and people are carrying objects in front of the torches, which are then these objects. Their shadows are cast on the screen in
And
front
we
of us,
think
like
that's the world.
we're in a movie. Now we even have sound for it.
Mhm.
So ordinary life is involved being in the theater of our everyday life. Now, to some extent, I think this is where most philosophers live.
Hmm.
But we are people too, we philosophers.
Yes.
We have our own presuppositions and so on about everyday life. And if you study the history of 20th century philosophy, one of the criticisms of it by people who helped develop it is that we're focused on medium-sized objects. When we're trying to figure out the nature of reality, medium-sized objects which we can see with our senses and interact with, and so on. But think of everything that's left out of our experience. If you study neurophysiology, you discover that far more information is coming down the optic nerve to massage the message
Hmm.
than is coming up. Never reaches the brain directly without going through the rinse. It's huge amounts of information, and all our senses is wiped out. We have far more neural activity in the brain when we are little kids, infants,
Hmm.
and little kids. But quickly, those most of them get just fall away, so that we have these major pathways for perception linked to our need for survival, so that we can understand enough about reality to function in a way that allows us to live.
Hmm.
Now, the assumption that our sense organs and our mental and physical interaction with the information provided on them by them provides us with a clear and complete picture of reality is incredibly naive. Now, especially that we know how the senses work by stripping away vast quantities of data, which we would be overwhelmed with, were it just to pour in. Now, in people who take various kinds of psychedelic drugs and so on, report what has been called the opening of the doors of perception,
Hmm.
so that now you get a much more greater inflow of content
Yeah.
that's hard to cope with.
Yeah.
So our experience is just experiencing mechanisms in the brain mind is designed to limit all that so
Yeah.
that we can get around in the world.
It's interesting you mentioned that. It's to my understanding that what psychedelics are doing is they're removing a lot of the regulative functions of the mind.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so it's not really adding anything to your mind. It's really just allowing what was already headed there to
That's right. So that
to land.
also it tends to alter the go-to place for understanding who I am,
Mm.
which has a kind of anchor. these are brain functions which help anchor the sense of self. Now, what the psychedelics, some of them can do is undermine that. So
Hmm.
now you're more free floating.
Hmm.
There's no core, no center.
Yeah.
And this, for some people, then could become a bad trip.
Yeah.
Now, this is why, taking psychedelics just kind of on your own, just to see what happens, this is not how they were traditionally used.
Hmm.
There was always a sacred, setting for this, and spirit guides, people who've been there, who would then help interpret what happened and so on. I entered some of these spaces in long-term meditation retreats, and when
Hmm.
I was doing a lot of Buddhism. Incredible, deconstruction of myself and my ending up in kind of absolute nothingness. And when I came to, it was like, whoa.
Yeah.
And so they have these docents, these guys and gals who are there in the meditation.
Hmm.
This is
It's interesting
so
you say that.
I reported this experience, and this guy said, "Hey, it's okay. You're going to be okay. Just take the next session off and take a walk in the woods over there, and you'll get, quote, recoagulated in no
Oh wow.
time,"
Hmm.
unquote.
It's interesting
It
you
was
say
right.
that because
I
me
kind
and
of
my
came
wife
back
are
together.
me and my wife
So
are both interested in the vipassana, sort of the secular approach to Buddhism, the vipassana meditation, the mindfulness practices,
yeah,
um,
right.
and I went against sort of the good advice, and I kind of did psychedelics on my own, and I kind of had the experience you're describing there. I was kind of just
Hmm.
not a good time, but
It's not a good thing, but it's an okay thing if you have a coach,
yeah, yeah,
who's there, who's been there and said, okay, it's okay. You're going to come back. Just
hmm,
go with it. Don't be afraid. In
yeah,
fact, the message I've heard, I've never had LSD or anything.
hmm,
I don't know. I have plenty of reports of this, but I'm told that one of the wise prescriptions is, if there's something that happens that you're afraid of, go toward it,
hmm, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Because that's where the action is, right?
yeah,
For
absolutely.
you, right?
So I don't want to, as interesting as this is, I want to take us
We'll have
back to
another session on this.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I didn't know you were fascinated in those things, and it's sort of you might get the same experience when you talk about your experiences on meditation, when you talk about the there that is there in meditation around other professionals. You can sort of get that raised eyebrow look, sort of how when you talk about aliens. Maybe
Right.
at least that's my experience when I try to talk about some of these things, and my experiences. I get sort of that very skeptical eye. So it is really interesting, and I understand what you're saying there. But when we talk about the hesitation of philosophers and the hesitation of other professionals, whether it be astrophysicists or cosmologists,
Right.
regarding um, these these reports, do you think that it is a hesitation that is from within? It is a sort of a cognitive, mental slash spiritual hesitation to um, interact with the claims, or do you think it's a hesitation with the credibility of the claims? Because for people that don't have the time to become well versed in multiple subjects, when we see Donald Trump post AI images of aliens, or when we hear the talk about the alien footage only coming from, you know, it only gets minimal airtime if it's even covered by a big
Right.
name network like BBC or NBC or CNN. These, it, to my experience, if these were credible claims, and if this footage was reliable, it would be blasted on the airways, nonstop, and it would be the thing to just focus on day in day out, the fact that we're not alone.
Right.
What's your response to that? Do you think it's something within the person that's hesitating,
Well,
that's making them hesitate, or
that's right.
something with the evidence?
Well, those are related, of course. I mean,
Hmm.
but it's an important point you're raising here. I would say this. Back in the late '90s, the CIA wrote in its own public journal. I mean, they have an external journal, a history of CIA involvement in depicting all UFO claims as nonsense,
Hmm.
as misguided, blah blah. The whole 9 yards. That they themselves were heavily involved in encouraging journalists, academics, serious researchers not to mess around with this. It's all hokum, and there's no there there.
Hmm.
So they admitted that. All right. So we know that historically, the main this stuff was being worked out in the late 40s and early 50s when no one knew what to do about this. And eventually the move became, well, they were afraid that too much UFO reporting, and there was a lot of it, would interfere with real Soviet missiles or
Mm.
planes.
Mm.
And so one way to dampen down all this stuff was to poo-poo it and say, look, there's nothing there, and
Mm.
it's all weather balloons or meteors or whatever, or misguided people or something. So that is one reason that the lack of credulity in regard to the phenomenon. People just uh, learned not to say anything serious about it. Broadcasters, if there was a UFO reporter, would kind of laugh about it and discourage people from taking it seriously.
Hmm.
And there was a reason for that: national security. All right.
Mm.
So there's that. Now I think another thing that's equally important is the fact that we were raised in a very anthropocentric worldview.
Yeah. Yes.
We
Yeah.
are on top
Yeah.
of the cosmos, basically.
Hmm.
We don't know if there's any other life out there. As you mentioned, Fermi, the great physicist, said, "Where's everybody?" Well, they haven't showed up. They haven't showed up in a
It's because
way.
they're not there.
That's right. And that's
Yeah.
why they're not there. And maybe they're not there because intelligent life like we have is incredibly rare. And
Hmm.
so that if there's another intelligent species on the other side of the galaxy, how are they ever going to notice us?
Hmm.
Um, but the point is that this anthropocentrism that helps constitute our core sense of self. My worth, my value is tied up with the fact that at least we're better than animals and plants.
Hmm.
We stand up on the top, basically.
Hmm.
And the idea that one reason that in modern times, in 18th and 19th century, with the rise of modern science and Darwinism and evolutionary theory and so on, basically it's increasingly got rid of anything outside of the rational, intelligible mode of reality.
Hmm.
Gods, goddesses, angels, demons, witches, you name it. All that is purged.
Hmm.
There's no, and that what reality is composed of is matter in motion, and that what science does is able to make predictions upon the kind of motion that matter will make, and that's it. The universe is stripped of any inherent value or purpose. In fact, there's no meaning at all to anything except what we make up.
Hmm.
And it's pretty hard to raise a kid saying there's no meaning to anything. It's just whatever you make up on the playground or in Congress.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just no society in history really has tried to do that. But that's been part of our thing.
Hmm.
Now, if we basically worship ourselves, we're the top, right? Then any threat you see to that position in the scale of reality, you see, is a threat to our sense of self and well-being and worth. And so so that we're in the cave, you might say, we're on top in the cave. That's where we think we
Yeah.
are.
It's a
But
really.
in fact, it may well be. In fact, I'm sure of it. There are other domains of possible experience. People report these in various kinds of states, altered states, and that these are reported throughout history by people. So there are other domains of reality to which we can get occasional access, but we don't know how to access it normally. I mean, normally we live our lives like this. Now, it could be that these UFOs, whatever these things are inhabiting those domains, and that they are able to, when they come through, sometimes they can materialize in some way that we can then encounter as a physical object. Now, that doesn't mean that they're only physical. That could mean that they can then dematerialize. And like often is reported, the UFO is flying along, suddenly it blinks out.
Hmm.
In other words, you can read enough of this stuff. Now, here's the other thing I would add to this. There's a third wing of this, third aspect of this. A very significant portion of UFO encounters where have a powerful psychological effect on the witness.
I can imagine. Yeah.
I mean, because something's zooming along and then suddenly stopping and then going straight up, and doing all the weird stuff that people report.
Hmm.
Sometimes, other times, you have, that's another weird part about it. Six people are in front, who are on a picnic table looking over the ocean. Three of them see this UFO. The other three don't see it.
So has there been group sightings?
Yeah, there are plenty. There's group sightings of hundreds of thousands of people in China back in the 50s. I
Hmm.
mean, there are massive group sightings. But the experience of it ends up provoking within many of these people who have this experience subsequent psychic powers, telepathy. Where there's street lights start going out as they walk underneath them. In other words, that some kind of change happens organically, chemically, organically within many people who have these sightings. So there's this secondary effect, you see, on the observer that is neglected if we as scientists, and I would add as philosophers, we're just going to focus on what we can measure with our instruments.
Hmm.
Because what's left out there is measuring the experience, the content and consequence of it for the observer, for the witness,
Hmm.
because that's a crucial aspect of the event. Now, if I have some really great sighting of some cool thing an animal does, or this, that, and the other thing, I am not left with the consequences I just mentioned a few moments ago.
Yeah.
When I have these UFO sightings and so on, often you have this residue, which is totally unexpected by the people who have these sightings. Their lives change in some way.
Hmm.
So that, it seems to me but here's to come back to the whole scientific view of reality.
Hmm.
None of the stuff I just talked about, the experiential content, the consequences, and so on, you really can't measure that very well. It's called, in scientific terms, anecdotal.
Hmm. Yeah.
This gal says this. Well, okay, I can't get my instruments over there because the thing they're talking about, I want to focus my X-rays, my radar, whatever, to see what profile we can get that way. But it leaves out the experiential content, and that is an example of the fact that our own interiority, our first-person subjectivity, is not taken seriously by science.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can't study it very
Yeah.
well.
Do you think that's a flaw of science, or do you think that's just a necessary precaution? Because when I look, I agree. I can find some flaws in empiricism and physicalism, if there is still physicalists out there.
Not many.
Yeah, not those. I understand that those might be sort of on the way out, but empiricists are still pretty abundant. And
Sure.
it's hard for me to argue against them, because it's hard for me to imagine a world where a lot of resources and energy can be directed at something that is just unfalsifiable or unverifiable. And this is not to say that these claims are not true. It would just be, I mean, I think the risk of there being a bad actor or a false report sort of stifles the willingness of institutions to pursue these claims, if that makes any sense.
Well, look. Let's say I'm a philosopher, and I am a
Mhm.
philosopher. Why would I not be interested in this?
Oh no, I can
No,
encourage the philosopher engagement.
I'm
Yeah.
just saying, and why shouldn't many academics be interested in this?
Hmm.
In other words, here is this enormous anomaly that's been going on for 80 years. That is, and if you got to do some of the work, go back and see the typed up letters and stuff. Now they have access to all these documents where in the 40s and 50s, Air Force generals and all talk about, aircraft chasing these flying saucers, and they're on radar and they're sighted. And I mean, the whole nine yards. I mean, it was all going on. Now then it gets squished down. The CIA goes on about kind of make fun of it. We try to push it aside, and yet there it is. All right. Plus,
Hmm.
add to this all the other weird things that go on with people. Poltergeists. I used to make fun of Bigfoot. I used to tell John Mack when I was in Cambridge that we're doing alien abduction and stuff. I used to say, look, I got to draw the line somewhere.
Yeah.
Bigfoot, right?
Bigfoot's a good place to draw the line.
Right. But I have changed my mind. The idea that Bigfoot is a physically real primate somehow living off the land in the Northwest, as well as in a place like England. They had Bigfoot sightings in England. Now, where is an 8 or 9 foot tall primate going to, first of all, hide in England, Britain. And what's it going to eat? I mean, to feed that, this critter would have to be taking up barn loads of food and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's never been a carcass found,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's footprints. There's twisting and done high up in trees. There's this smell, the sounds, and so on. So people have all these experiences. And then there's a great book. Now, if I'll tell you what, if you read this book, Where the Footprints End, which is about Bigfoot, it's a fantastic read because it's very subtle. It doesn't say that they are normal mammals of some sort, yet they can somehow show up in our world. So anyway, the title of the book, these guys are tracking these Bigfoot footprints, these big things, and they're
Mm-hmm.
4 or 5 foot lengths, and so on. So then and it snowed out recently. So it's got 8 or 9, 10 inches of snow. So they follow it right out of the woods into the snowfield. They go follow it for a while, and then the footprints stop.
Hmm.
Now, what are we to make of that? Now, these kind of things are reported by serious people, in other words, who are not wacky, who are not trying to make stuff up. They have they do the photo, they do all this kind of stuff. So if the footprints end, they didn't hear a helicopter picking up this critter,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's even more implausible than anything else. Then what happened to it? Well, it just went out of material existence. It's as if it can instantiate as a body and then vanish.
Hmm.
Now, we can do all kind of stuff like that. We can make stuff show up and vanish.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not as good at it as whatever power there is.
We need instruments for that. Yeah.
So one way, there's a great writer, Joshua Cutchin. I've read several of his books. He and a number of other people say the following: ghosts, Bigfoot, UFOs, aliens, all the weird anomalous stuff that people report, and huge percentages, 70% or more of people report anomalous experiences in their lives. Precognition, knowing someone's going to call. 88% of people in hospice report seeing the dead near the time that they're going to die. In fact, when my brother-in-law died at home, the hospice organization, the official document said, when the dead start showing up, this is an indication of the time is near. Now, how are we to evaluate this kind of stuff? So that one way to evaluate it is it's all variations on a theme. And one way to take that, it's all variations on the theme of death and dying. That we are mortal, finite, temporary, and all these pretenses to living forever and trying to defeat death. Now we got AGI coming. We hope to upload into computers and get artificial immortality and so on. This is all basically not the point of being human. The point of being human is somehow reconciling to your mortality. And here's a philosophical rub. This comes into 20th century existentialism and so on, that to be mortal is to take upon yourself the opportunity to live with the realization of your own death, because only that grants your life a speck of meaning. One reason computers, there's nothing at stake for a computer.
Yeah.
Everything's at stake for us because we know that we have a limited amount of time. And I remember when I was a young professor, I used to teach one of the books by Carlos Castaneda. I don't know if you know about him, but he was, it's a great series by a PhD anthropologist who got his PhD from UCLA based upon his field work in Mexico with this Mexican sorcerer, or brujo, they're called. But he could do all kind of wild stuff. But one of his themes was take death as your advisor. In other words, don't be petty in your life. Don't waste your life. Every moment matters. Take a stand. Be courageous, and so on. And so that the extent to which, for many people, this experience shifts their taken for granted kind of zombie everyday life, and makes them encourage them to be aware of the limitation of the time we have.
Yeah.
So that one way to interpret much of this is that these experiences have something to do with uh, leading us toward what the transition from life to whatever's next.
Hmm.
So that there's the ultimate meaning of it isn't that there's some kind of empirical phenomenon we want to add to our list of realities, but there's something liminal in the in-between zone going on here that we're never going to figure out because it's not about its content so much as the work it's doing for us, which is encouraging us to live our lives in a more fulfilling and committed way.
Hmm. Another aspect of the way we live our lives would be how we believe we ought to act in certain, moral predicaments. I have argued with many vegans, but one position that I've always found really compelling has been Peter Singer's. And in his book Animal Liberation, he speaks of I think he coined the term. I don't know if it existed before, but speciesism. And he
Yep.
says, to eat animals is to be speciesist, to think that their experiences are less valuable to yours. And my response to that has always been, I value experiences. I value the capacity to have subjective conscious experiences. As long as an animal can feel pain, we ought to limit or to sort of minimize the amount of suffering in the world, even if it's experienced by non-humans. I have always, since learning about speciesism, I've always kind of been proud to say I'm a speciesist. I've always kind of owned that and said, yeah, I'm a speciesist, and I don't care. I of course I think humans are on top. Now that we're talking about other life forms that might have a more expansive or a broader scope of a capacity for subjective conscious experiences, I'm experiencing sort of violence onto my position there of me being a proud speciesist, because I'm sitting here hoping if there is a life form that is more sophisticated than myself, I would hope it would respect my autonomy and respect
Well,
my experiences.
absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, this is this guy Whitley Strieber was a famous horror writer, wrote all kind of best-selling things in the 80s, and he underwent an alien abduction. Many, in fact, he's got a whole lifetime of it now. But one of the things he wrote this bestseller called Communion, but came out about 40 years ago in 1986 or so. But about halfway through the book, he's been abducted. This stuff's happening to him. They're examining him, and he's one point said, "You have no right to do this." And guess what came back? We have a right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I read that, I mean, I didn't experience, but I read that. I said, "Holy shit!"
Yeah.
Now, what if they regard us as kind of advanced primates,
Mm-hmm.
and that to them we are kind of like, chimps or whatever.
We end up in a zoo.
We're that's right. We're a cosmic zoo. Maybe they're even feeding on us. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
they like our souls for lunch or something. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
They're operating at a significantly higher level than us. And look at the stuff they allegedly can do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just run rings around us, basically. So this ought to be very disturbing to us.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
if
disturbing
this
to me
is one
now.
reason, it's one reason that people would rather really not think about it,
Yes.
because it just can't be like that.
Mm-hmm.
We should be on top. Now, I want to introduce something here because you brought up a really good topic about philosophy. Now, philosophy has traditionally, for a long time now, relied on the physical and social sciences to provide us with a picture of reality.
Mm-hmm.
Philosophers don't do scientific experiments. We're not empirical, this and that. We take our understanding of reality from what the sciences tell us, which, often is pretty good advice. But when I was in graduate school in the 70s, I remember when Singer's book came out. It first came out in the New York Review of Books as a long article, then a book. It was very influential. But here's the position of philosophers at the time. Nobody had any concern about any of this.
Yeah.
Philosophers, human beings are clearly, the most evolved primate. Anything underneath us, well, that was fair game for us to eat, do
Uh-huh.
anything with. Vivisection, that is experimenting on living
Yeah.
animals.
Live cut. Yeah.
not a problem as long as now here. Why could they say this? Because they more or less agreed to the idea that was active in the National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health, the major funding organization for scientific research in the university. Animals don't feel.
Yeah, this is Descartes calling them automaton.
That's
When
right.
you
And his,
when you
his
kick a
yep,
dog, that's just the noise that machine makes.
that's right.
Yeah,
And
it's
his
Descartes.
student Malebranche carried this on, and so that this was the attitude of
Hmm.
most philosophers.
Yeah.
Now that's what they thought reality was. Now think about this. This is mid 20th century. Behaviorism was all
Hmm.
the rage in the social
Skinner.
sciences.
Yeah.
Most philosophers basically were kind of behaviorists. You didn't read. I remember in graduate school there was nothing written about the subjectivity, the first person experience, consciousness. All these terms were taboo.
Yeah.
They didn't exist in the literature. Only in Europe with the existentialists,
Yeah.
Heidegger and so on,
Sartre.
did
Yeah.
they still talk about this stuff. That's why I got attracted to Heidegger and Sartre and all these people,
Mm.
because they were acknowledging the reality of our first person experience.
Hmm.
So so one of the reasons it's so hard for us to let in the possibility of that idea I just suggested, that there's a whole host of these weird intrusions into our experience, is because we don't want them there. But on the other hand, and they're not allowed to be there by natural science, because there's no way to study these things.
Hmm.
We can't do controlled experiments because these things show up when they want.
Yeah.
Now, what happened? A major event happened in the late 90s. The University of Arizona started up its every 2-year conference on consciousness.
Hmm.
And that's where David Chalmers and others developed the idea of the hard
The
problem
hard
of
problem.
consciousness, and restored to philosophy the legitimacy of examining first person experience.
Mhm.
That was a huge shift in philosophy.
For those that don't understand, the hard problem of consciousness is how do you get a subjective conscious experience from
Me,
from wetware, basically. And that's the conversation in the AGI world is, do you need, wet brain meat to have
right?
consciousness? And if not, then there's nothing stopping composite synthetic material from being conscious.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So I want to be
So,
respectful of your time, Dr. Zimmerman, but
yeah.
because I see we're coming up on the 45 minutes here, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to say some closing remarks. I mean, there's about 1 million more questions I want to ask you, but I just there's you've opened me to be. I through this conversation, I thought I should share that I've become a little less hesitant with some of these claims, and regardless of the credibility of these claims, the philosophical importance of grappling with even the possibility of a superior or a more a more intelligent life form than humans. You've definitely moved me into the camp of, we need to have a moral code that would be able to account for this and to include them into our moral system. And as even though I continue to eat meat, I believe I've brought into my consideration the experiences of other life forms like cows and pigs and things
Sure.
like that. But I want to give you some closing remarks. But I guess I had one more question. Of course, I think it would have to be purely speculative. But is there a reason, do you think, that whether they're extraterrestrial or whether they've been dormant, earthbound species,
Right.
whatever it is, do you think there's a reason that they haven't made explicit contact with us? It couldn't be out of fear, since if their technology is so much more superior to ours. I'm just curious again, it would probably have to be pure speculation, but I'm just curious what you think of why
Well,
there has not been a more just in my freaking face,
right. Well,
here
it's
I am.
people, waiting for the saucer to land on the White House lawn. I mean,
Yeah.
now. I'll tell you what. They evidently could do that, but one of the things that Jacques Vallée and these other people have suggested about UFOs in particular, but all these other critters as well, is that that's all about being elusive.
Hmm.
They don't let themselves be tied down, you know, and moreover, even if they did, there would be denial about it. John Mack, when he was still alive at Cambridge, he had a friend at the Boston Globe who was a reporter, and he said, "Now look, Tommy, if a mothership the size of some football field lands in Boston Common at noon on a
Yeah,
Saturday and 50,000 people witness it, would you believe it?"
fifty
He said,
thousand
"No,
people on drugs.
I couldn't believe it unless I had my own eyes on it." So there's a huge denial factor. In other words, it can't be, therefore it isn't.
Hmm.
That's the point of view of many of us. Now, that's why when it happens, it's so shocking. In fact, the term that was developed, ontological shock, that when you have this kind of encounter with something that cannot really be there, but there it is, right?
Hmm.
Your worldview really trembles. And that means your
Yeah.
sense of self trembles.
Hmm.
What you took to be bedrock now is quicksand.
Hmm.
And it takes a while for people to kind of recoagulate their identity in the face of that experience. They typically do, but now their lives are changed because now they know that the official account of reality, the kind of physicalism, materialism, determinism, and so on, is just great for some things, but just a lot of stuff's left out.
Sure.
And I've seen it,
Hmm.
and so that I say I've never had a UFO sighting. I would love to have one, but
Yeah.
maybe I don't need one. I'm a philosopher. I'm already ready to
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
look
They don't
into
need to
this.
convince you. Yeah.
I do. I
Um,
do wish more of my colleagues would take this on, though. I mean,
I can understand that.
there's real serious ethical stuff here,
Hmm.
epistemological questions. How do we know? But about what these people say is so. There's metaphysical issues,
I mean, pure physics too.
just empirical issues. It's a really gold mine, really, for philosophical inquiry.
Yeah.
Now, because it's all this stuff out now, it's now okay to talk about it.
Hmm.
And so that you don't have to worry now about people looking at you funny because, geez, it's coming out in the press.
Yeah.
Now, I would say, by the way, that nothing I've seen in these videos and stuff they're releasing demonstrates to me anything super natural or super weird. I mean, and people are always going to say, well, they're holding back the good stuff. Well, that's a conspiracy theory. Maybe
Yes.
there isn't any good stuff, but I do know that people have experienced extraordinary things.
Hmm.
Credible people who are sober and upstanding members of the community and law enforcement officers of the works, and they say, you wouldn't believe it. Well, no, I can't believe it.
Hmm.
You'd have to be there. But even in that case, someone standing next to you may not have seen it or may report seeing something different.
Hmm.
That's the nature of the wily, slippery, elusive nature of these phenomena.
Yeah.
And that's itself food for thought for
Hmm.
philosophers.
Yeah. I lied. One last rapid fire question. Do you think we would mistreat extraterrestrials? Do you think the Western world or
Well,
even the Eastern world is certainly the Easterns would be a little bit probably more humane. Do
I
you
don't
think we
know.
would treat it well?
Even Buddhists become, Japanese Buddhists were terrible in World War
They've
II.
held some guns before.
So but I tell you what, you should see this. There's one of the most influential and famous UFO films is called The Day the Earth Stood Still.
I've seen it.
All right, now what happens there?
Yeah,
Right?
we take it
Try
and
to
put it in a
start
lab.
firing weapons, and this guy's efforts to bring peace and all this stuff. So that's one possible reaction,
Hmm.
because the threat, since our stance about anything different is it's threatening,
Hostile. Yeah.
hostile. It's got to be hostile. So we got to keep our guard up.
Yeah.
So maybe they don't want to just show up. Maybe they have to show up in the interstices.
Yeah.
Of
Maybe
edge.
they know that. Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
they're.
Have you seen Spielberg's new movie?
I did.
Yep.
It was a good movie. It was fun. It's good
I
action.
enjoyed it. Yeah. Yeah. And
Whether,
it's
there's
it's
a
pretty
lot
much
of,
everything we're talking about.
yeah. There's a lot of the issues that are coming up, and also a major issue and you brought it up earlier, the issue of permission. To what extent is it okay for these entities to intervene in such violent, terrifying ways with human beings? The reply, we have a right. Well, we have a right to what? I mean, we draw lines for ourselves, but we are regarded by them in such a way that these lines mean nothing.
Hmm.
Now, I would want to conclude with this, and they've done recent in the last 7 or 8 years big interviews with thousands of people, experiencers, people reporting this abduction experience, often multiple. And despite the initial terror, the resentment, the confusion, and worldview collapsing, and so on, down the road, they said the consequences of this have been really mind expanding. And it's as if many of them view this initial encounter as a kind of initiation process, which is typically terrifying and difficult and confusing, right?
Hmm.
But so that 75, 80% of people have that view of this experience years later, that they see it as a positive thing.
Hmm.
John Mack in his books often reported this. And the first UFO encounters back in the 50s with the Space Brothers, the message already was against nuclear war, save the planet.
Hmm.
And that's what many of these people report in as a result of their abduction experiences, a shift in their attitude toward the planet, toward other people, an openness to higher levels of reality, and so on. So, the intention here and the outcome, and what that might say about the human future, that seems to me up in the air.
Yeah.
But it does seem to be that most of these abductions have seemed to have stopped. There still maybe some, but we had a huge wave in the 60s, 70s, 80s.
Mm.
And did anything change? That may be the question.
Yeah.
Have we changed for the better?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you've given us a lot of things to think about, and I really appreciate your time. This has been a conversation that's a little out of the ordinary for me to have on the podcast, but I guess I should mention we met by accident, or I thought you were a Michael Zimmerman that was dealing with moral philosophy,
Right.
and then you sent me some of your work, and I thought, okay, I got to do this.
The other Michael Zimmerman's a really good philosopher.
Yeah.
We often get each other.
Both of y'all. Yeah, I can imagine. Yes. Okay, well, I'll let you go, but again, thank you very much for your time. This has been awesome. Yeah.
Do it again. Take care.